Okay, welcome Clare Wilding, and thank you for joining us in this conversation about leisure as commodity. I'd just like to introduce Clare. Clare is a well-known writer and academic in occupational therapy globally and especially in Australia. Clare actually is now a freelance academic occupational therapist, and she has her own business called Knowledge Moves. Thanks for joining us today, Clare.
Thank you. Good to be
So,
here.
yeah, thanks. Thanks for giving us your time too. I've got a couple of questions for you, as you know, but let's let this conversation take its own form if it needs be. Okay, so the first question was what got you interested in the role of leisure in occupational therapy?
Okay, so there's two reasons, as there often are in these kinds of things. There was some personal experiences that I had, and then there was also some professional experiences that I had. So I'll start with the personal first. So there was a time when I was quite unwell many years ago, and I wasn't able to work as much as I normally do. So normally I work full time, and so during those times when I wasn't working so much, I engaged in tapestry, which is something that I like doing. I make up my own tapestries, and I found that to be a very restorative activity for me. It really helped me to cope with the stress that I was experiencing at the time. It gave me some pleasure and relaxation, and it enabled me to use my creativity. It also gave me something to think about during times when I might have been overwhelmed by other kinds of troubling thoughts that was enjoyable. And so I found it I could see how therapeutic that activity was, that occupation was. And so I realised on a personal level the importance of leisure.
Hmm.
Then on a professional level, when I worked in mental health, I used to work with people who were chronically unwell, and many of them weren't able to work. They weren't well enough to be able to find and keep employment, but they still needed something that was meaningful and purposeful to fill their time. And for many of them, what we would traditionally call leisure occupations were those occupations that helped them to find meaning and purpose in their lives, and also to as I talked about with my personal experiences, to cope with some of the difficult experiences that they were going through and they were experiencing. So, for example, I ran a craft group with some ladies who had chronic mental illness. It was once a week, and it was a terrific opportunity for them to get together with other people, to share, to talk, to laugh. And I used to some of them I used to collect from their homes because they weren't able to make their way independently to the group. And I'd go into their homes, and the items that they'd be making in the group were displayed around their homes with great pride. And so it was really obviously something that was very important and meaningful to them. So that leisure occupation became a focal point of who they were, and it helped them to have a positive identity other than being a person who had serious and long-standing mental illness, which is, what was their case. So when I think about leisure in OT, I think it's really about that Greek notion that is talked about in the book chapter, which is a very early conceptualisation of leisure as about something that can help people be to learn and to be self-fulfilled. So that sort of self-actualisation role. So that's, I guess, that seeing the restorative power of leisure and knowing that occupational therapists are interested in helping people to engage in occupations to enhance health and well-being, I think that leisure is certainly a very important occupation for occupational therapists to consider as part of their therapy and to facilitate as much as they can. And there's a great role for OT there.
Well, that leads me really well to the second question. What are some of the reasons that occupational therapy stopped attending to the area of leisure?
Okay. I think that, one of the main reasons I think is because of the messages that we're given about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable as part of therapy. So often occupational therapists who work for institutions, so public institutions like hospitals and healthcare centres, those institutions are very much bound by a range of ideas that can actually constrain occupational therapy practice. One of them is lack of finances. So there's financial restraint in many of those organisations, and there are decisions made about what's important and what's not important. And so the decisions that are made about what's important is that often things like moving people through the system is important. So a focus on helping people be discharged from the system, ironically. So it's almost like as soon as you get into the system, they want you out again, because of course every moment you're in the system, you're using up money. So there's a focus on moving people through quickly, and there's a focus on restraint. So I think that one of these ideas is the idea of hegemony, which is where we view the world as natural, even though those ideas might dominate us and constrain our practice. So we see the world in the way that others might want us to see it, and we accept that view of the world, and that excludes other ways of viewing the world. So, for example, OTs get caught up in this very easily, particularly the medical model, scientific thinking, and fiscal hegemony. So ideas of constraint about, what we should be spending money on. So OTs get caught up in this idea that we have to just do things like addressing range of motion or assessing memory, rather than working with people to enable their occupational participation, because of course the medical model is about helping people to achieve health through curing illness or injury. But occupational therapy view is that health is created through engaging in satisfactory and meaningful occupations. So they're at odds with each other, but we as OTs tend to accept that idea that that's what we ought to be doing because that's what everyone else around us is doing. And so that means that we shape our practice in ways that meet those objectives, and at the same time we shut down possibilities for other ways that we could practice. So we focus on what helps a person to be discharged from hospital. So it might be about ensuring the person is safe from falling or is able to feed themselves or clean themselves, rather than focusing on what's really meaningful to that person, helps them to see to live a life that's meaningful and that is about what they do every day. So we get kind of waylaid by those systems of thinking. So I think also in the area of leisure, many health service providers see leisure as a luxury. And so because they're chronically short of funds, they see that leisure isn't an important issue. So therefore we tend to accept this idea as well, that leisure is a luxury and that the things that we ought to be focusing on is helping people get back to work or helping them to be able to live independently. So as a group we also tend not to be a group of people who will speak up or rock the boat. We try and get along with other people and fit in. But sometimes I think we need to think differently about who we are and what we can offer. And unfortunately, many OTs do accept the position that they can't change things and they feel powerless, and so therefore they often don't try because they think there's no point.
Well, this is a bit concerning. So
it can be.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the way it has to be. I think that's the way it has traditionally been. But I think that there are options for change.
Yeah. And so I think what you were saying there is that the kind of people who are drawn to occupational therapy are often very caring and not wanting to rock the boat. That's the kind of people they are as well.
That's right. And because most of us are women, traditionally, and this isn't the case for everybody, of course, I'm not speaking about individuals per se, I'm talking about as a group, women have tended to be not speak up, not cause problems, not speak out against, the sort of dominant ideas. And often women have had, not as much power as perhaps, other people. So I think, yes, as a group, we tend to be quieter and more submissive, whereas perhaps we don't need to be like that.
Yeah. So since we have kind of given away this area of leisure in occupational therapy in a lot of areas, especially in the areas of physical rehabilitation,
Yep.
and other groups have come up like recreational therapists and diversional therapists. Do we need to look at leisure anymore? We've got those other people.
Yep.
Are we in a position to reclaim leisure?
I think that occupational therapists could and should use leisure as part of their therapy if it's appropriate for the person or the situation that they're working with. Although there are these other groups, and I think that those groups do a great job, and in fact those people can be our allies because they already are sold on the importance of leisure as a therapeutic activity. So they've already got half that battle, but they're a small profession. Occupational therapy is a bigger profession than them, and so as a group, that they're also constrained. Their practice is constrained by these conversations in society that say that leisure isn't as important as work or looking after yourself. So they actually need our help. So I think we need to join with them and help them to make leisure more a part of everybody's business and being more a part of the agenda of health and well-being. So I don't think we should look at it as a competition with these other types of therapists, but rather as a collaboration and as allies. I do think that kind of terminology probably works quite well here. It might be, I think that if you are in the happy position to be able to work with diversional therapists and recreation therapists, that it's good to think about the ways that you can work with those people and the differences that each profession brings to the work environment. So occupational therapists might be able to bring an understanding that of people in situations that are very complex, because we are educated to think broadly about people and to think about a large range of influences upon the person and the occupation. So the person, the environment and the occupation, and we have the thinking tools to be able to make changes in each of those domains in order to bring about more satisfactory participation and engagement in occupation. I think that those skills can really assist the recreation therapists who perhaps are more focused on the types of occupations that they're used to working with, so the leisure occupations, and they haven't received the same kind of education that occupational therapists have. So they have a slightly different way of looking at the world. And in fact, it's those differences that help the two of us working together to be stronger and to provide a more comprehensive solution to the problem than if just one profession was involved. So working with them, we might be particularly useful in helping with complex issues, but probably also in helping them with the design of their programs and helping them to think about the ways that they can be very therapeutic, to think about how they can be designed to meet multiple goals, that kind of thing. So that's probably a way that we can work with them. And in our own occupational therapy practice, I think that it's also really important for us to be thinking about how we can use leisure as part of our therapy. So there's opportunities for us to use leisure in our own practice, and also to collaborate and work with recreational therapists to make leisure more of an item, if you like, on the health agenda.
Yeah, I really like the way you've actually turned that around, and thanks, because that's given me a really good food for thought. So I've got students who are going to be listening to this conversation, and they're probably wondering right now, their first year, second year, what can they do while they're studying occupational therapy to somehow bring leisure back into OT's core business?
Yep. Okay. So I think that first and foremost, we need to think about leisure whenever we work with clients. So we'll routinely assess a person's ability to engage in self-care occupations and potentially work occupations. I think we also need to routinely ask about leisure occupations, and not just as a, how do you fill in your spare time, but what are the important, leisure occupations that you engage in that really help you to feel good about yourself, to develop yourself, to help you to cope with the stress that you're experiencing, to really enhance your health and well-being. And I think also remembering that, as I said at the beginning, that for some people, leisure occupations might in fact be their main occupations. So for many people, work is the main occupation that people engage in, that takes up most of their time, of their doing time. But for people who have chronic illness or disability, or even people who are unemployed, or people who are geographically isolated, or people who, for a range of different reasons, perhaps also they're living in desperate poverty, they might not, work might not be their main occupation, or even, there's only so much self-care you can do in a day, even caring for other people. I mean, that's an important productive role, but it also might not take up all of your time. So we need to find leisure occupations that, or recognise that leisure occupations might be those people's main occupation. And in the book chapter, we talked about how leisure over time the concept of leisure has changed, and that it used to be that Greek notion of learning and self-development, whereas in modern times or contemporary times, it's become much more passive, and it's become that idea of commodification. So the main leisure activity that most people engage in is watching television. And while that is perhaps a great occupation for people who've been busy working all day, if that's your main occupation, if all you're doing all day is watching TV, that's ultimately very boring. And so it's about recognising that people might need to have occupations, leisure occupations, that they can be more active in and that actually help them to grow and develop, rather than they're just passively babysitting or having their life just pass day by day in dreadful monotony. With the commodification of leisure, which is about leisure as a product, and so you tend to buy units of leisure, if you like. So if you're looking at entertainment, so there's the watching TV, but there's also watching movies or arts and cultural events or sporting events. So being a spectator, which is very passive. There's also the idea of shopping as entertainment and as leisure. And then there's the idea of tourism and you know, taking holidays as ideas of leisure. And again, they might work quite well for people who are employed. But if you're not working a lot, full time, you can't afford to engage in many of those activities. And so they're not sustainable for a large percentage of people. So again, it's about trying to find other ways of engaging in leisure, or other forms of leisure occupations that are more accessible and sustainable for more people. So I really think it's that idea of returning to that notion of the Greek idea of leisure as about self-development and education, is and that people need to, we need to give people the message that it's important to be an active participant in leisure, and that leisure may be effortful. And the fact that it's effortful doesn't detract from the fact that it's still leisure. It's still freely chosen. It's still engaged in for the sake of doing it. It's fun. In fact, there can be a great sense of accomplishment that comes from making an effort to be involved in something and then achieving it. So, for example, doing a play for fun, or learning a language, or solving a puzzle, or writing a poem, whatever it might be. So there's many different forms of leisure that people can engage in which are effortful, which is like that idea of serious leisure, which is also talked about in the book chapter.
Yeah.
So what students can do, first of all, think about leisure, assess leisure, and then address problems of engagement and participation in leisure occupations with their clients. Encourage their clients to think about leisure as a viable alternative to work, but in that active kind of form of leisure, that you know, that sort of form of leisure which is about effortful and active participation rather than just passive or consumerism behaviour. And I think that there's lots of different ways that, like, there's lots of areas of growth that occupational therapists can think about. So particularly if I think about aged care, we've got a growing number of people who are in the in the retirement phase of their lives, who are older. So there's people from the full spectrum there. There's a lot of people there who are going to need to be meaningfully occupied. So occupational therapists have a potential role there with providing planning for retirement, not the financial planning, but the how am I going to live my life kind of planning. What am I going to do? How am I going to fulfill my time? And I know just from personal experience with people friends I've got, that kind of stage is very, very scary for many people. They see their 10, 20, 30, 40 years of life ahead of them still, where they're not working, and now they have to find activities to fill their days and their lives. So occupational therapists have a role there. We also have a role in, as people who are getting older, you can often experience age-related problems. For example, age-related aches and pains, and you don't move as well, you often don't see as well, you often don't hear as well, you might have more difficulties thinking, you might have difficulties with memory, which can all impact on your ability to engage in leisure occupations. So occupational therapists have a significant role there in helping people to problem solve and find ways of being able to still participate in the occupations that they want to do, the leisure occupations, even though they might be experiencing physical, cognitive, emotional, social barriers to participation. So I think that working with a group of people who are ageing in leisure is a potential area of growth for occupational therapists. There's also other areas, I think, in the area of health development, health promotion, and community development, I think that there's, again, great opportunities for occupational therapists to use leisure occupations as ways to solve some of the problems that people are experiencing. So if we think about, the increasing number of people who are overweight and obese, active physical leisure occupations, or even, healthy slow cooking, can be ways that can help to address some of those issues. And those types of leisure occupations are the kinds of things where OTs could have an impact on some of those health problems. Also, if I think about rural communities who are isolated, there's often a lack of opportunities there for people to engage in a range of leisure occupations. So I know that, for example, in the area that I live in, and this is just even for young people, so I live in a rural area of Victoria. It's challenging for young people to find leisure occupations that are like a good range of occupations. We tend to focus a lot on sport, but then there's, not everyone's into sport. So there are some opportunities for music or drama or other kinds of cultural pursuits, but those opportunities are far less. So thinking about, how do we help communities that are perhaps disadvantaged because of their geographical location. There might be other ways there for occupational therapists to work with those communities and to think about, well, what are the ways that we, what are the occupations that are offered? Are those occupations accessible? So are the buildings physically accessible, or the grounds, or are they socially accessible? Those kinds of things as well. There's a lot that occupational therapists can do to address some of those issues of injustice and just disadvantage because of, where you happen to be located.
Yeah, so many areas.
There's lots of areas, yeah.
I feel like we've just touched, seen the tip of the iceberg here, Claire. We could probably talk about this all day. You've actually, I think actually, you wrote the chapter in 2005, and unfortunately there isn't a new one, but do you think it's still current, the things that were written there?
I think so. I think that there's still, the issues that were written about are still relevant today. I think that the area of leisure is still a really important one, and I know from speaking to occupational therapists that it still isn't an area that OTs tend to focus on. And again, for those reasons that I talked about earlier, is that, they're told that there's not enough money to do that, or it's not as important as perhaps other areas. But I wonder whether it is important, and that, it is something that perhaps we need to be thinking about more, and thinking about ways that we can, actions that we can take to make a difference. I think about that. There was a TV program not long ago about the choir of hard knocks.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? And I thought that was a terrific occupational therapy project, even though it wasn't run by occupational therapists, because that's the kind of community development project where I think that a leisure activity, in this case, which was choir singing, had tremendous benefits for people who were homeless and who were significantly disadvantaged by the fact of being homeless. So this is a way that occupational therapists can actually take action to make a real difference to the health and well-being of people, and to address some of the pressing social problems that we face. Society keeps developing, and so I think that in that book chapter, we see the historical progression of how leisure has changed over time, and I think we're facing another great revolution now with the digital age and the ubiquitous nature of iPads and mobile devices, tablets, and that also is going to change perhaps leisure as well, and I mean it already probably is in some ways, and so I think as occupational therapists we need to keep looking back and looking forward, and thinking about what are the actions that we can take with our perspective of the health-enhancing potential effects of occupation. How can we use that knowledge to make a difference to the lives of people? So the chapter is still relevant in that it helps us to understand some of the issues that have occurred in the past and that are still occurring now, and it flags that there's still potential problems to come which we haven't yet fully realised, but that there is still a role that occupational therapy can take, and that leisure is still going to be one of those areas that is an important area for everybody really, and that we need to think about the ways that we can help people to have leisure occupations that are health enhancing and restorative, and that everyone has access to those occupations.
Thanks, that's great. I think you've wrapped it up really beautifully there, because it's you're saying let's look back, let's learn, let's keep looking at that, and then let's now look to the future. And it isn't out of our control to make a difference.
Absolutely not, and I think that that's a really important message, is that occupational therapists, their best tool is their minds, it's thinking about, I think Elizabeth Yerkes has said that, it's thinking about the difference that we can make in taking action. And even though there might be other messages around us that say that these things aren't as important, I think that's where it's up to us to speak up and say, well, actually, in my experience and from this evidence, these things are very important and they can make a difference. And therefore, I think it's worthwhile pursuing this. Let's try this. Let's have a go. Let's not just, give in and just, fit in with what is convenient for most people. We have a real obligation to think about the health and well-being of all people, and how we can help people be well and healthy and live satisfying lives.
Thanks, Claire. I think we'll leave it there for this conversation, and thanks so much for joining us in our class here at University of the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you, and good luck to the students there.
Thanks.